At one of the busiest airports in the country, a woman stood calmly in line, passport in hand, ready to board a routine flight. But the moment she spoke, everything changed. Her accent drew smirks, then laughter, and finally a sharp remark from an airport agent who clearly thought she didn't belong there. Passengers nearby watched as the humiliation unfolded. To them, she looked like just another traveler being brushed aside. What they didn't know was that this quiet woman wasn't just a passenger passing through. Within hours, a single decision she made would send shockwaves through the airport and cost someone far more than their pride. The question is, why did no one realize who they were dealing with until it was already too late? For most people passing through the terminal that morning, it was just another crowded travel day. Rolling suitcases rattled across the polished floors, flight announcements echoed through the halls, and long lines stretched in front of the airline counters. But among the travelers stood Amara Okoye, a woman who had spent years building something extraordinary. To everyone around her, she looked like a typical passenger, calm, composed, dressed simply, and traveling alone. What they couldn't see was the life she had built through relentless work and quiet determination. Years earlier, Amara had started a small travel coordination service from a tiny office, helping international groups navigate complicated trips across continents. One satisfied client turned into 10 turned into hundreds, and before long her company had grown into a massive global travel network worth hundreds of millions. Yet Amara never carried herself like someone with power. She preferred to move through the world quietly, without attention or special treatment. That morning, she was at the airport for what should have been a routine meeting with partners overseas, just another trip in a career that had taken her across the world countless times. But the moment she stepped up to the counter and spoke, something shifted. The airport agent's expression changed. A smirk appeared. And suddenly the tone of the conversation wasn't professional anymore. What began as a simple check-in was about to turn into something far more humiliating, and far more costly than anyone in that terminal could have imagined. Amara stepped forward and placed her passport gently on the counter. The airport agent barely glanced at it at first. His attention seemed more focused on Amara herself, specifically the way she spoke when she politely explained that she was checking in for her international flight. Her accent was noticeable. Soft, rhythmic, unmistakably foreign. The agent's lips curled into a smirk. At first, it was subtle. A small chuckle under his breath as he typed slowly on the keyboard. But then the smirk turned into something louder, something meant to be heard. A quiet laugh. A couple of nearby passengers looked over. "Say that again," he said, tilting his head slightly as if he genuinely couldn't understand her. Amara repeated herself calmly. But this time the agent exaggerated a confused expression, shaking his head and letting out another laugh. The tone wasn't professional anymore. It wasn't even polite. It was mockery. A few people in line behind her shifted awkwardly. One woman exchanged glances with her husband. Another passenger looked down at his phone, pretending not to notice what was happening. Amara stayed composed. She had dealt with this kind of thing before, small moments where people assumed that an accent meant confusion, ignorance, or incompetence. Still, she kept her voice steady and repeated the details of her booking. The agent leaned back slightly in his chair. Then came the comment. Loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. Something about how people who could barely speak properly shouldn't be traveling internationally. Something about how maybe she should let someone else handle things if she wanted to understand the process. The words hung in the air. A few passengers gasped quietly. Others stared in disbelief. Amara felt the heat of dozens of eyes around her. But instead of arguing, instead of raising her voice, she simply watched him. Calm. Silent. Observing. That seemed to frustrate him even more. He began dragging the process out. Typing slowly. Asking unnecessary questions. Double-checking details that didn't need checking. Minutes passed. The line behind Amara grew longer. The tension thicker. Someone in the back whispered something about the delay. Still, Amara remained composed. But what the agent didn't know, what nobody in that terminal knew, was that this wasn't just an ordinary passenger standing at the counter. And while he was busy laughing with a coworker nearby, Amara quietly reached into her bag. Her phone appeared in her hand. She scrolled through a few messages, paused, and then typed something short. Very short. Just a few words. She pressed send. And within minutes, a chain reaction began, one that would ripple far beyond that airport counter, and leave the agent wishing he had never said a single word. The terminal had grown unusually quiet around the counter. People were watching now. The laughter from the agent had faded, replaced by the awkward tension that fills a room when something clearly wrong is happening, and no one knows how to step in. Amara still stood there, calm and composed, her passport resting on the counter exactly where she had placed it minutes earlier. Across from her, the agent sighed dramatically as he tapped a few more keys, clearly enjoying the attention he was getting from nearby co-workers. Then it happened. A sharp ringtone broke through the silence behind the counter. One of the supervisors picked up the phone, his expression neutral at first, but within seconds that expression changed. His posture stiffened. "Wait, what?" he said quietly. The agent barely noticed. He was still half smiling, glancing at Amara like this was all some harmless joke. But the supervisor's eyes slowly lifted and locked onto her. The room shifted. Another phone rang. Then another. Airline staff began whispering to each other, confusion spreading across their faces. The supervisor covered the receiver and leaned toward the agent. "You need to stop," he muttered. The agent frowned. "Stop what?" The supervisor didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at the computer screen that had just refreshed in front of him. His face went pale. Because suddenly, the passenger standing at the counter wasn't just a name on a boarding pass anymore. Her company name had just appeared in an internal alert sent to the airline's corporate offices. A $950 million global travel organization. One that booked thousands of international flights every year. One that had just cancelled a massive block of upcoming reservations. And every single booking connected to this airport. The agent's smile slowly disappeared as the supervisor leaned closer and whispered something into his ear. The words were quiet. But their impact was immediate. For the first time since this began, the agent looked at Amara, not with amusement, not with mockery, but with sudden, unmistakable fear. Because in that moment, the reality finally hit him. The woman he had just humiliated in front of an entire terminal had the power to bring their entire operation to its knees. The change in the atmosphere was immediate. Moments earlier, the agent had been laughing, relaxed, certain he held all the power in that moment. But now the confidence had drained from his face. The smirk was gone, replaced with the stiff realization that something had gone terribly wrong. Around the counter, airline staff moved quickly, whispering into phones, checking screens, calling supervisors. What had seemed like a small, private moment of humiliation was suddenly echoing through corporate offices far beyond the airport walls. Amara still hadn't raised her voice. She simply stood there, calm, watching the situation unfold. Within minutes, a senior manager rushed over. His tone was completely different, careful, apologetic, urgent. The passport that had been ignored moments earlier was now treated like something fragile. An apology followed. Then another. But the damage had already been done. The bookings connected to Amara's company, thousands of flights, partnerships, and long-term contracts, were already being rerouted elsewhere. A single decision made quietly on a phone in her hand had triggered consequences far larger than anyone at that counter had imagined. Not out of revenge, but out of principle. Because for Amara, the moment wasn't just about an insult. It was about something deeper, something millions of people experience every day. The quiet assumption that an accent means ignorance. That someone who looks or sounds different must somehow be less worthy of respect. As she finally took back her passport and walked away from the counter, the terminal slowly returned to its usual noise. Suitcases rolled. Flights were called. But the lesson left behind lingered. Respect should never depend on someone's status, wealth, or influence. Because the truth is, you never really know who the person standing in front of you might be. And the real question is this: if Amara hadn't been powerful, would anyone have cared at all?